Formula E gets a lot of flack from outsiders as being a series full of F1 rejects, drivers who simply weren't talented enough to remain in the quote-unquote pinnacle of motorsports. However, I think it's incredibly unfair to label racing drivers based solely off of their performance in a single racing series. Even if a driver can't succeed in it, Formula 1 requires their drivers to be the very best in the world, so even a grid of F1 rejects is still an incredibly strong group of drivers. Today though, we'll have a look at one instance when a proven F1 star, a driver who won 11 races, sat on the podium 41 times, and finished runner-up in the F1 Championship in 2008, a runner-up he's still trying very hard to deny to this day, decided to give Formula E a try. His performance, however, was not quite what he or his fans were expecting. Let's have a look at when Formula 1's Felipe Massa struggled to compete in Formula E. The year was 2017. 36-year-old Felipe Massa was finishing up his final Formula 1 season at Williams Martini Racing. The Brazilian was meant to retire the previous season, but decided to come back after Williams lost Valtteri Bottas to Mercedes. Despite struggles with the pace of the car, Massa was able to finish 11th in the season standings ahead of teammate Lance Stroll. But by then, I think he was well and truly done with Formula 1. Even before this season, however, Massa had his eyes set on Formula E. In January of 2017, he had completed a test in Jaguar Racing's Formula E car. Massa was even in talks with the Jaguar team to compete in the 2017-18 season with them, before the F1 deal fell into place that was. After his official retirement from F1, Massa was still interested in Formula E. After a few more talks with teams, it was announced on May 15, 2018 that Massa would join the Venturi Formula E team, replacing Mauro Engel for the 2018-19 season and signing a 3-year deal. Around the same time, Susie Wolff became team principal for the team, and the two had been teammates at Williams for several years. Massa looked to take advantage of the new Gen 2 car for Formula E, essentially leveling the playing field for the new season. After some private runs, Massa arrived at the 2018 Valencia preseason test and outperformed teammate Eduardo Mortara on all 3 days, an impressive feat considering Mortara's Formula E experience. For his first race in Diriyah, Massa qualified 13th, 3 spots behind teammate Mortara, but during the race he'd make some brilliant overtakes, getting him up and into the top 10. Unfortunately, he'd be given a drive-through penalty that demoted him to finish P14, and to add insult to injury, he'd be given a 30-second post-race penalty due to improper use of fan boost, finishing his first race in P17. He'd follow it up with another P17 at Marrakesh, and a retirement due to suspension issues in Santiago. Mexico City would be his best race yet. After making it to Superpole, he'd qualify P3, but fall back in the race to finish P8, nevertheless scoring his first 4 points. Hong Kong would be an even better race. After qualifying 9th, he'd take advantage of others having issues to come across the line in 5th, scoring another 10 points. But this finish would have been a lot more impressive if his teammate Eduardo Mortara hadn't actually won the race. In Sanya, he'd qualify 15th and work his way into the top 10 to grab his single point. In Rome, he'd qualify 10th, but retire 11 laps in due to a drive shaft issue. In Paris, he'd make Superpole for the second time, qualifying P5. The race, of course, would be pure chaos in the rain, and after spinning a few times, he'd manage to come home P9, scraping 2 more points. The next race in Monaco, however, would be the defining race of his Formula E career. After making Superpole yet again and qualifying P5, he'd use his F1 experience at the track to make some daring overtakes and finish P3, scoring his first and only podium in Formula E. Berlin, though, was a bit more humbling, with Massa qualifying 19th and finishing 15th. In Bern, he'd qualify 12th and take advantage of the chaos to finish at P8. And finally in New York, on Saturday, he'd qualify 21st and crash out of the race, while on Sunday he'd start from last and climb up the order to end out his first season with a 15th place finish. So at the end of Massa's rookie season, he finished 15th in the standings out of only 19 full-time drivers. He finished ahead of fellow ex-F1 rookie Stoffel van Dorn in points, but behind teammate Eduardo Mortara. Compared to Mortara, Massa did worse on paper. Mortara had managed to win a race, score 1 more podium than his teammate, out-qualify him 8 times out of 13 races, and finish with 16 more points on the board, but his average start and finish were both worse than Massa's. In addition, Massa was able to outfinish Mortara 8 times. Mortara's season looked more flashy, but Massa was more consistent and, more importantly, kept it out of the barriers far less than his teammate, who had failed to finish on 6 instances. I don't think this first season was bad for Massa. Venturi clearly wasn't at their best, but Massa had been able to consistently keep the car straight and pick up points on a semi-regular basis. He had learned a lot, and heading into the 2019-20 season, he and the newly renamed Rocket Venturi Racing, now under Mercedes Power, were ready to make a statement. After an unremarkable test in Valencia, the team arrived at Diriyah for the season opening doubleheader. On Friday, teammate Mortara qualified P4, while Massa qualified a disappointing P17. Still, he'd push his way up the order to finish P12. On Saturday, he'd qualify 16th, and after coming across the line 15th, he'd receive another time penalty for overtaking under a safety car period, dropping him to P17. The next race in Santiago would prove much better. Massa would make Superpole once again and qualify P4. He'd spend much of the race in the top 10 before a lunge by teammate Mortara would shove him out wide in the hairpin. Massa would just hold on to grab 2 points with a P9 finish. After locking up on his qualifying lap, he'd start the next race in Mexico in P21. He'd only managed to run 6 laps, however, before a trip to the barriers forced him to retire. At Marrakesh, he'd struggle in qualifying once again, starting the race in 20th before taking his third P17 of the year. So at the time of the COVID-19 hiatus, Massa's season really wasn't going well. In 5 races, he'd only managed to score 2 points and sat 19th out of 24 drivers in the standings. Teammate Eduardo Mortara, on the other hand, was comfortably sitting P7 with 32 points scored, absolutely carrying the Rocket Venturi team at the time. Massa needed a reset, and the 6-month lockdown due to the pandemic would certainly give him a chance to reevaluate his season and get back on the right foot. When the series returned to Berlin for the 6 races to end the season on August 5th, Massa looked to have improved slightly over the break, qualifying 10th for the first race. He'd stay in the top 10 almost all day, until late in the race he'd lock up his rear tires and hit the wall, knocking him out of the running. The next day he'd struggle in qualifying to start 18th, make it about as high as 60th of the race before retiring with 2 laps to go due to running out of energy. He'd qualify slightly better for the 3rd Berlin race, starting P13, and charge up the order, making it as high as P6 before Formula E dropped the hammer on him. Early in the race, he'd made contact with Lucas de Grassi, sending the Audi driver around. The FIA gave Massa a drive-through penalty, sending him all the way down the order to finish in P19. Really unfortunate result to him in what may have been his best showing all year. The next race, however, started out better. After finally making Super Pole again, he'd qualify P6 to start the race. He'd fight hard in the top 10 all day, averaging about a P8 running position. He fell back late in the race due to energy, but still finished the day in P10, picking up his first point since Santiago. For the penultimate race of the season, Massa qualified 8th and after a largely uneventful day, fell back to finish in P13. However, heading into the final race of the season, Massa's name echoed around the grid for a very different reason. During the pre-race meeting, it was announced that Massa would leave the Venturi Formula E team following the season, choosing not to extend his deal to 3 years. At the time, I don't think many were surprised though. All throughout the Berlin portion of the season, Massa had been critical of just about everyone in the paddock. He criticized the FIA for his penalty when he spun de Grassi, he criticized his team for miscalculating energy strategies, he criticized the drivers for the standards of racing during the 2020 season not being as professional as those of the season prior, he even criticized Formula E's energy-conscious nature, saying it prevented drivers from really attacking in racing as they were too focused on conserving energy each lap. Despite these comments, the Venturi team were appreciative of Massa's stint with the team, and the duo ended their final year together with a P16 finish. So after his second and final season in Formula E, Felipe Massa didn't have much to show on the stats sheet at all. 0 podiums, only 2 points finishes, a 12.5 average start, and a 16.2 average finish, both worse than the season prior. Mortara hadn't managed a podium either, but he had scored on the points 7 times with a 9.3 average start and 10.5 average finish. In terms of the standings, Mortara had finished 14th with 41 points, while Massa finished all the way down in 22nd with a pitiable 3 points, behind drivers like Rene Rast, Pascal Wehrlein, and Alex Lynn, who had only raced for half the season. There was no real excuse for his lack of performance this season, as all the other Mercedes-powered cars were able to stay competitive on a somewhat regular basis. Even if Massa hadn't decided to renew his deal, it's safe to say Venturi wouldn't have been entirely wrong to replace him. He'd simply underperformed. So that was it, Felipe Massa's short and uneventful Formula E career. Though he had started with some potential, he just couldn't live up to it in his sophomore season. It just seemed like Formula E wasn't a good fit for him. Massa was clearly blindsided by some of the aggression by the other drivers in the field, and the importance that energy conservation had in finishing a race well. And when the Brazilian wasn't enjoying his time in the series, he decided to step away. We started this video by talking about the stigma behind Formula E and its driver lineup, possibly reinforced by the recent struggles of Nick de Vries. What I think we can say now is that one's results in Formula 1 and Formula E are almost incomparable, and this goes for other racing series too. Every motorsport offers unique challenges that drivers must face, and I don't think it's fair to say that Formula 1 offers a greater challenge than Formula E, rather a different set of challenges for the drivers competing. Felipe Massa serves as a living proof that yes, F1 fans, Formula E is definitely harder than it looks.